Hello, my name's Elsa Churchill. I'm the genealogist at the Society of Genealogists. This talk on early provincial borough guild and associated records are based largely on talks I give for researching your ancestors in the 17th century, which are courses I do regularly for the Society of Genealogists. The records relating to those who became freemen of guilds and livery companies in the City of London and the out with guilds in other towns and cities around the United Kingdom provide a remarkable opportunity to research ancestors' lives through the 17th and 18th century, and indeed earlier in some cases. They show the traders and crafts they practiced, the networks of co-workers and employers they associated with, and often their parentage and spouses. Freedom of a guild might lead to freedom of the city, whereby one gained the right to vote and to trade and responsibilities to pay rates and taxes. Guilds of craftsmen dominated life in many towns and developed in the Middle Ages for commercial, religious and social reasons. There were three types of guild. The guild merchants, a guild that embraced several different trades and crafts, emerged in towns in the 12th century. Prior to the Reformation, there were religious guilds that were founded primarily for charitable purposes, such as the endowment of schools or hospitals. Speaker craft guilds, such as those for weavers or tailors, originated in the 13th and 14th century in order to regulate each craft or trade. These soon displaced the guild merchants. John West, in his work Town Records, likens guilds to chambers of commerce, monopolies, insurance companies, friendly societies, family trustees, religious foundations, burial clubs, institutes of good practice, and quality control, and to a very limited extent, trade unions. The craft guilds were originally voluntary associations of craftsmen according to a hierarchy of the master craftsman, the journeyman, who hired himself to the master on a daily basis, and the apprentice trainee. The guilds usually controlled rights to practice that trade and admission to their guild. Most men had to serve an apprenticeship, usually 7 years, in order to be admitted to the guild. The guilds provided for their members in sickness or old age and for members, widows and children. Some large towns had many guilds for the different crafts. Newcastle had 46 guilds, including butchers, shipwrights, tanners and weavers. Richmond in Yorkshire had 13 guilds. In Buckingham, about 36 guilds were combined into 4 companies, each with a like trade. Smaller towns that were dependent on only 1 or 2 crafts might accordingly have only 1 or 2 guilds. Gradually, the guilds' powers and authorities declined, and most of them had ceased to operate in the late 18th century. London was the main exception. The most famous guilds were those of London, which were known as livery companies because of the distinctive livery that was worn by senior members of each company. And these companies retained influence and regulation of trade into the 19th century. Some guilds survived in other places, generally as charitable bodies. As the guilds declined, the trade that was actually undertaken by a member might become less important, so that a son could follow his father into a particular guild or livery company, even though he practiced a different trade, so that a baker may not have joined the baker's company, for example. This can make it difficult to find the records of an ancestor, but not impossible. Women did participate in the guild system, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, but in far smaller numbers. The surviving records of the provincial out with, i.e. outside London, companies, records of the names of many, recording the names of many masters and apprentices, can be found in local city or corporation record offices, as well as county archives. The National Archives Discovery Catalogue lists the holdings of many such local archives, and is a good place to begin looking. For example, Cheshire Archives and Local Studies Cheshire Record Office holds original records of 20 city guilds in Chester, including the local bakers, barber surgeons, brewers, butchers, coopers, cordwainers and shoemakers, drawers in D, wet and dry glovers, goldsmiths, innholders, cooks and victuallers, joiners, carvers and turners, saddlers and curriers, smiths, cutlers and plumbers, tanners and merchant tailors. Typically, there may be company books, minutes and account books, apprentice enrolments, order books, and much more, often dating back to the 17th century and earlier. Although most works on guilds and livery companies concentrate on the London companies, it's important to remember the guilds of other cities and towns outside London, i.e. the out with guilds and boroughs. Local custom meant each varied from the other in practice and governance as well as records, but many followed, however roughly, the custom of London. TNA's Discovery Catalogue is a good place to start looking for records, as this lists local archives, collections, such as a link to the Company of Butchers of the City of York held at the Explore York Archives, as you can see in the catalogue entry here. Guild organisation and control were by cooperative agreements between the leading members and the burgesses of the city. Any regulations agreed were incorporated in the ordinances of the Guild and enforced by the searchers of the company. The Butchers' Guild of York held sway in matters of hygiene, weights and measures, meat restricted days and fast periods, and over foreign, i.e. non-guild butchers. The guild searchers operated as overseers for the good of the trade, with powers of search of shops and stalls, of imposition of fines, and the application of correction and punishment where appropriate. Standards of workmanship were protected through the apprenticeship system. Following the custom of London, the authorities declared that until a man grows unto the age of 24, he is not grown into the full knowledge of the art that he professeth. It's not an easy word to say. 7 years were generally agreed as the minimum period for training and servitude before the apprentice became a freeman to ply his trade. Apprentice registration was controlled so that children of freemen had priority of admission to the learning of a craft. Guild masters were responsible for the indenture and for the entry of apprentices in the city register, following 1 month's probationary period. Trades could tend to congregate their shops in one area of a town or city. The Shambles in York is well known as the Butcher's Street, but the trade area also extended over St Andrew Gate and St Saviour Gate, and the butchers may well have been responsible for civic duties. For example, they acted as the city executioners. The Register of Admissions of the Company of Merchant Tailors in York from 1560 to 1835 has been published. Copies can be found readily online at the Society of Genealogists, etc. The members' names and dates of admissions have been supplemented by the author with other information from the company records of minutes and the Masters and Apprentice books, and show details such as the members' parentage or details of his apprenticeship and any offices that he held in the company. For example, this is the entry for Richard Crothwaite. It shows that he was the son of Richard, son of Thomas. Sorry, it shows that he is Richard, the son of Thomas Crothwaite, later stone arrays in Threlkeld in Cumberland, gentleman. Richard was apprenticed on the 17th of September 1630 for 8 years to William Allinson of York, gentleman, and then to George Chater on the 22nd of March 1633 to 4 for the rest of his term. He was admitted a member of the company on the 31st of January 1637-8 and held the company offices of searcher in 1641 and warden between 1669 and 1671. Freemen of the City of Newcastle guilds monopolised the powers and offices of the town government before 1835. The trade guilds in Gateshead were granted their charters of incorporation by the Bishop of Durham. These organisations were originally set up to protect individuals from the power of the Newcastle guilds across the river. The first charter so granted was to the dyers, fullers, locksmiths, etc. in 1595. Orders and minute books contain information about the regulation of the companies and their members. When used with admission and apprentice books, lists of freemen, these records can be of real value to the family historian. There's a very good guide to the records from Tyne and Wear archives describing the various guild records and resources for those guild members who went on to become freemen. Some records have been published, and again, it's worth looking at the Society of Genealogists Library Catalogue, as this is the sort of thing the library collects, such as the records of the Company of Shipwrights of Newcastle, 1622 to 1967, in the Surtees Society, Volume 181, which includes company accounts from 1674, noting many members' names, and the company's orders and resolutions since 1622, including entries such as on the 13th of July, 1818, Alexander Doig, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, it's spelled D-O-E-G, a free brother of this company, demanded the services of the following apprentices: Thomas Menham, George Flock, who later left his master, Stoddard Blair, Thomas Doig, Matthew Gray, who all agreed to serve the said Alexander Doig. A useful gazetteer of guilds and borough ordinances can be found on John West Town Records, which also gives an overview of the history and activities of provincial guilds. It's worth looking for the short guide, The Out with London Guilds of Great Britain by R.F. Lane, and Tom Hoffman gave a really useful paper to the Guildhall Historical Association in 2006 on the rise and decline of guilds. He also compiled a 4-volume bibliography of the guilds of Great Britain and Ireland, which is published on the website of Birkbeck College. Part 2 covers the provincial guilds. These could be general merchant guilds, craft guilds, fraternal and religious organisations, as I indicated earlier. A good tip is that the Victoria County History or local antiquarian histories will usually indicate if there are local guilds in the towns and cities that you're interested in. These can often be found on the British History Online website. In many boroughs, though not all, membership of a guild was a prerequisite for becoming a freeman of the borough and incurring voting rights and civic responsibilities, all of which might be recorded within the borough charters and town records. In some 200 towns or boroughs, being a freeman gave you certain rights and responsibilities, including the right to vote. Hence, here is a poll book of Bristol, being a list of those freemen and freeholders who voted at the general election of members to serve in Parliament for the city and county of Bristol in 1812. Though local custom could have slight variations about how this worked out. In the City of London, you couldn't become a freeman of the city by marrying a freeman's daughter, whereas you could become free of a London guild in that way. In Hereford, for example, you could only become a freeman by marriage, providing your prospective bride had no brothers. Many of the freeman records for towns and boroughs are published and can be found online at the Society of Genealogists. Examples are for Canterbury, Coventry, Leicester and York. And in fact, an advanced search in the Society of Genealogists library catalogue brings up to about 144 hits for many places with published freeman records or poll books showing freemen who voted. Local custom is of most importance, and it's worth knowing what it was in the towns, cities and boroughs where your ancestors lived, and where guilds may have flourished and boroughs and burgesses ruled. In Kent, for example, where I lived, the municipal corporations were the cities of Canterbury and Rochester, the boroughs of Maidstone, Queensborough and Gravesend, Romney Marsh, and the towns of the Cinque Port, such as Faversham and Sandwich. Of these, only Canterbury, Rochester, Maidstone, Dover, Sandwich, Hythe, New Romney and Queenborough were represented in Parliament with MPs purely for those boroughs. The others were not, and there the jurors and common councilmen, elected or appointed by freemen, became part of the local municipal corporation or the council that administered the town, but voted in the county parliamentary elections. In all the Kentish boroughs that did return an MP, the franchise was vested solely in the freemen, and the choice and admission of freemen was in the hands of the governing body, the mayor, jurates and common council. The details varied to a degree, but usually along the lines of birth or patrimony. I mean, sometimes that meant you had to be only the eldest son who could become a freeman. If you, in others, included sons-in-law of freemen. You might become a freeman by apprenticeship to another freeman or by purchase. In theory, freemen had their rights as qualified tradesmen with rights and privilege to trade within the borough boundaries, to be exempt from tolls and dues such as market fees, or from serving on a jury or in the militia. But some places were more open than others, and enforcement of these rights and privileges varied. In Gravesend, for example, the freemen were exempt from serving on juries, but anyone who refused to become a freeman was liable to imprisonment. The Burgess books of Bristol, recording the names of men admitted to the freedom of the city, exist in an almost unbroken sequence from 1558 to the present day at the Bristol Record Office. And here we see from the manuscript freeman records for Bristol, there is John Turner, brass founder, who gained his freedom by marrying Mary, the daughter of John Hicks, a brass founder deceased. The benefits of many of the Bristol city charities were reserved for burgesses and their dependents. The newly made burgesses was given a burgess certificate, a parchment document recording the oath or affirmation in the case of a Quaker, which he took on his admission as freeman, and bearing the signature of the mayor and town clerk. Since apprenticeship could lead to freedom, it was necessary for the corporation to keep an accurate record. Master and apprentice would come before the mayor, and particulars of the apprentice indenture would be taken. As a result, there exists, in parallel to the fine series of Bristol Burgess books, an equally fine series of apprentice books from 1532 to the present day. Many young men were attracted to towns to serve and train as apprentices. Here, the apprentice rolls for the city of Bristol show that Richard Turner, the son of John Turner, late of the town of Leicester, a dyer, was apprenticed to William Beechhuff, brass founder and brazier, and Mary his wife for 7 years. And intriguingly, it says that friends are to find apparel and washing. And this young man has certainly come some distance to learn his trade. Nice examples in the published roll of burgesses, or the guild merchants of the borough of Preston, show in the introduction A sixth-generation pedigree drawn up entirely from the records of guild entries from 1541 to 1662. The Freeman records for the city of Canterbury from 1392 to 1832 have also been published. The entry shown here that Peter Lambert, barber, becomes a freeman in 1719-20 after marrying Elizabeth, the daughter of John Hamilton, barber and gentleman. It supplements the marriage entry in the parish registers, which does not record the bride's father's name. We see Peter himself taking on an apprentice in 1733. William Lambert, a victualler, became a freeman by redemption or purchase by paying £5 down. Francis Jolly, the baker, stands as bondsman or surety to ensure Lambert is to pay £5 yearly until the sum of £15 more be paid, and with the proviso that it is not intended to make his sons or daughters free, but himself an apprentice only. The Canterbury City freemen were typically not confined to the more affluent classes. Quite a few were labourers who had acquired freedom by birth, i.e. being sons of freemen, and most were craftsmen or traders. Freemen had trading rights as well as voting rights, but these came at a price. Thomas Roche, a cabinet maker, became a freeman in 1745 on payment of a £20 fee, but was also required to pay £4 for membership of the city's company of builders and carpenters. While guilds had traditionally protected trading interests in Canterbury, by the 18th century their role as a trade body had singularly declined and was more recreational, and Rush argued in print and through newspapers that they did little for their members and the fees were spent on feasting and drinking. The city records include a petition written in the 1640s by the barbers of Canterbury to the city mayor, aldermen and common councils of the city, protesting against the activities of Bartholomew Johnson, thought to be the father of the writer Aphra Behn, who was born and baptised just outside the city in Harbledown in 1640. The petitioners object that Bartholomew was not a freeman of the city and so had illegally opened a shop and was trading as a barber within the city walls and was likely undercutting the other barbers who had earned their freedoms through apprenticeships. There are later records of Bartholomew Johnson actually purchasing his freedom of the city for £20, and even later records of him being imprisoned for debt for not repaying a loan he had taken out to do so. The medieval guilds of Worcester included a guild merchant and various city companies, such as the Glovers' Company and Clothier's Company, with associated minutes and order books, apprenticeships, etc. By the 19th century, the Clothier's Company was undertaking charitable relief of the poor, issuing bread tickets and doles to named individuals. Only freemen were eligible for election to the councils, and freedom of the borough was restricted by right of birth in the city, serving an apprenticeship or purchase for £20. Of course, only freemen in the city might also elect their members of parliament and hence be listed in the published parliamentary poll books. Between 1800 and 1831, some 2,503 freemen were admitted to the city. 1,856 freemen had been admitted by birth or apprenticeship, and only 647 by purchase or gift, the population of Worcester at that time being 27,000. The Freeman registers for the city of Worcester are held by Worcestershire Archive and Archaeology Service. These have been transcribed and are online amongst name indexes available on their website. Some can be found online, notably on Find My Past. Here we have the entry for Ambrose Smith, who gains his freedom in 1731-2 by being apprenticed. It says here to Christopher Smith, but I'm not sure that's exactly right. Line 2 of the apprenticeship, of the freedom registers for York shows that William Simpson, a joiner, gained his freedom of the city of York, having served an apprenticeship to Thomas Dickinson. Line 5 shows Thomas Skipton, who gained his freedom of the city, having paid, i.e. bought his way in. Line 7 shows Ambrose Smith, a merchant who gained his freedom of the city by being apprenticed to Christopher Simpkins. Line 9 shows Matthias Smith, a linen weaver, having gained his city of York freedom by being the son of Matthew Smith, a freeman. Of course, the records of borough freemen and local guilds are found in city archives or in county record offices. In Norfolk, there were the boroughs of King's Lynn, Norwich, Great Yarmouth, Colgate and Eton, and these records, such as freeman rolls and admissions, apprentice registers and indentures, can be found within local rate books, Guildhall court books, chamberlains' accounts and leet books, muster session records, etc. There are good browsable examples in the Norfolk Borough Records datasets on Find My Pass, such as the King's Lynn Freeman admission registers from 1440, and I've shown a page from those here. It's absolutely worth trying to establish if your ancestors lived in towns and boroughs where they might be apprenticed or become freemen or be member of a guild, and these are invaluable records well worth looking up if you're wanting to take your ancestry further into the 17th and 18th centuries.